Hey YouTubes, how's it going? You guys seemed to like it last time when I did a voiceover of my video, so I'm going to try this again, see how it goes. This is my 2015 Breakout. I bought the Fuel Moto 110 kit and S&S cam plate and oil pump and the Woods 777 cam. So I'm installing those components today. So right now I'm just installing the cam bearings. I've already removed the old ones. I have another video about that already. So I have the tool on and I'm just pushing in the cam bearings. I already did the front one, so this is the rear. And you do this till it bottoms out. One thing to note is when you're doing cam bearings, make sure the riding is facing you. The other end is beveled, and that's how it seats inside. So I jumped a little bit in time. This is the next day, actually, which is today of this video. And I've already changed the O-rings inside of the cam chest, and I have the back plate, the very first part of the S&S oil pump installed. So I'm lubing up the gear rotors, or everybody calls them different things. So I've lubed up all of those, and I'm kind of just assembling everything now. The S&S kit came with a really tacky assembly lube. Normally I use a different brand. I don't remember the name of it at the top of this. I think it's Reds or something like that, but I'm really fond of the stuff that it came with. So this is where I'm just assembling the oil pump with S&S, at least. I don't know if all of them are like this or not, but you want to put it in the bike in parts. You don't assemble it all together and then slam it in. This kind of makes sure that everything's kind of lined up with the crank. So like I said, this is just me doing that, and I'm got the oil pump installed now, and I'm using that assembly lube to hit the cam bearings. I've pre-set up the cam plate, put my cams in, made sure that they were lined up with timing, and now I'm just pushing them in. You never want to exert a whole lot of force with that when you put them into the cam chest. They'll slide right in. Just kind of wiggle them around and let the cams find their home. So right now you'll see I just installed or put on some blue Loctite, and I'm doing my initial round of putting in the bolts into the cam plate. I use a Loctite called Permatex. I get it from O'Reilly's, and it's oil resistant, so I like that a lot. There's different types of blue Loctite, and I use the oil resistant one. So here's the tedious part. So since my top end is torn down, I don't have to find 6th gear and rotate the tire. I can just move the crank. So I've done some of the crank just to let the cam plate and oil pump find where they want to be, and then I screw them or bolt them down a little bit more, and then I'll move the crank some more, and then I'll tighten down the bolts, and it's a very repetitive process. So now I decided it would be a good time for me to put the oil pump bolts in, and it's the same thing. This is how tedious it is, guys. Some people think you just throw the oil pump and cam plate in and you bolt them down, but that's not the reality of how this works. You tighten down a little bit, you move the crank, you tighten down some more, you move the crank, and so right now I'm torquing down the cam plate after doing that a few times of moving the crank and letting it center itself. So these go to, S&S calls for 100 inch-pounds with blue Loctite, but I've done fueling brand in the past, and the fueling doesn't want any Loctite and 120 inch-pounds. So I'm just going off the recommendations of the manufacturer. So now I've moved the crank some more, let the oil pump find its center. Now I'm tightening it down just a little bit more again, and you'll see I'm going to move the crank yet again. And it's like I said, it's back and forth. It's just, this is how you do it. Otherwise, things just don't work out like they should. I'm finding that the crank is harder to turn now that everything's getting tightened up, which is normal. So now I'm getting the oil pump into a torque position of 100 inch-pounds, just like the cam plate. That one didn't quite feel right to me, so I backed it off a little bit and retorqued it. All these bolts, at least on S&S, have numbers on them on the cam plate, so you know exactly which order to go. Otherwise, you'll have to look in your manual and find out the pattern of torque sequences. The Feeling ones don't seem to do that, but the S&S is really cool because it has numbers on the cam plate that tells me which ones to go in order. So that's cool. So now I've got the chain sprockets on, and they're tightened down to 25 foot-pounds, and I'm checking the run out, or the clearance of them rather. So you take a straight edge and a 10,000th feeler gauge, and you don't want to be able to get that feeler gauge in between the straight edge. Otherwise you'll have to change the bushing on the back side of it. So everything was good. Actually, it was like 2,000th run or clearance, so I was like right on. I was really happy about that. And now you'll see I'm using red Loctite. You want to use red Loctite on these two bolts for to make sure they don't come out. So I'm doing that. Got red Loctite and then more red Loctite. I made quite a mess of it. I used a little more than I probably should have, but that's okay. It doesn't hurt anything. This makes it harder if I want to take it off again. One thing you'll see, a lot of people buy this special tool for 30 or 40 or higher dollars, and it locks the two sprockets together. You don't have to do that. All you have to do is press down the rear brake. Even with my bike off the ground or not having a top end, you just press the rear brake, and it's going to lock it for you. I see people buy these special adapters and shims or the locking tool rather, and it's not necessary. It's a waste of money. So the bottom one was like 25 foot-pounds, the top one was 35. Now I'm putting some blue Loctite so I can get the front hydraulic tensioner on. The rear hydraulic tensioner was already on when I assembled the cam plate. And I'll be torquing these down to 100 inch-pounds as well. Nearly everything's 100 inch-pounds because you go off the torque rating of the bolt, not what it's attaching itself to. And all these bolts are 100 inch-pound bolts. So that was this install in a nutshell. It's a quick 8 minutes, but it literally took me over an hour to do this myself. So thanks for watching.